on Health and Human Services, Coffee and Conversation with the WK Kellogg Foundation. And I want to thank my colleague David Holmes, the Director of Capacity and Leadership Development, who's based in our Cleveland Library and Learning Center. He'll be assisting us with technical and background support today, so I appreciate his help. And today's session will be recorded and posted for future review at our website, GrantSpace. And before I introduce our guest speaker, I wanted to share an outline of how we will be spending our time together today. So, of course, we will hear from from Linda Jo Doctor from the WK Kellogg Foundation and really learn about their food and community programs. And then we'll also take questions from you all, and you're welcome to submit your questions in the Q&A chat box. I think that'd be on the left-hand side of your screen. And you're also welcome to download the handouts for today's presentation, and that includes today's PowerPoint presentation as well, and that's in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And then, of course, we will just take a brief tour of the Foundation Directory Online, which is the Foundation Center's tool to do terrific grant seeking and researching of foundations. And then lastly, we'll follow up with a special offer for GrantSpace members and for anyone who's attending today's webinar. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Now, my name is Sarah Jo. I'm the Manager of Capacity and Leadership Development based in our San Francisco office. And of course, as I mentioned, we're joined with by Linda Jo Doctor, Program Officer of the WK Kellogg Foundation. And I have to say, I suspect some of you are brand new to the Foundation Center and our work. Just a quick overview of what we do. The Foundation Center is a national nonprofit organization, and our mission is to strengthen the social sector by advancing knowledge about philanthropy in the United States and around the world. One way we accomplish our mission is through educating thousands of people every year through a full curriculum of training courses in the classroom and online. And we offer free and affordable classes nationwide that cover the funding research process, proposal writing, grant makers and their giving, and of course other related topics. Some of you are probably familiar with us and our tool, the Foundation Directory Online, a comprehensive grant seeking tool. We'll talk more about this later towards the end of our session on how you might use this tool to find other health and human services funders like the WK Kellogg Foundation. And then lastly, another way we accomplish our mission is through connecting nonprofits to the resources you need to thrive through our free online portal, GrantSpace. And many of you probably are familiar with GrantSpace. This webinar is only available to GrantSpace members, but we do encourage you to explore GrantSpace, particularly the Health or Human Services resources page. And you can find more on the link on the screen. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming today's guest speaker. Linda Jo Doctor is a program officer at the WK Kellogg Foundation, located in Battle Creek, Michigan. In this role, she helps develop programming priorities, reviews and recommends proposals for funding, manages and monitors a portfolio of active grants, and designs and implements national grant initiatives, place-based work, and multi-year projects. We're just so thankful for her to be here given how busy she is. She's a member of the Food, Health, and Wellbeing team, and her work really focuses on the impact of environmental conditions on health equity. And she co-leads the Food and Community Program, which is an initiative designed to transform food systems and the physical environments in places where children live, learn, and play. And she co-leads the Foundation's place-based work in Detroit, focused on creating conditions so vulnerable children and families thrive. So, without further ado, thank you so much, Linda Jo, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and I'm very appreciative for this opportunity to talk with, I think, nearly 100 folks across the country, and through this unique opportunity here of a webinar. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about the WK Kellogg Foundation and its priorities and parameters that guide our grant making, our convening, our leveraging opportunities. And then to go from there to share a little bit about what's our theory of change, theory of action, and particularly focus on our food work and give some frameworks as to how we look at the food work. And then give an example of some work that's moving now where there's been tremendous traction across the country, and then open to questions and answers. So that's sort of the game plan. The title is Food and Community Transforming Food Systems and Shifting Conditions for Children, Families, and Communities. And first to share with you are the vision and mission of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And we envision a nation that marshals its resources to ensure that all children have equitable and a promising future, a nation which all children thrive. About 6-7 years ago, our board made a very strategic decision and decided that 100% of our resources must be focused on the well-being of children, in particular a focus on those children that are the most vulnerable. So our mission, we support children, families, and communities as they strengthen and create conditions that propel vulnerable children to achieve success as individuals and as contributors to the larger community and society. Mr. Kellogg started his foundation 89 years ago, and our board and senior leadership have a very keen focus on aligning our work with the wishes of the donor. And one of the comments that Mr. Kellogg said was, "I do not care what you do with our money as long as children are safe and happy." And today we translate that we must have a targeted focus on those children that are the most vulnerable. And as you will notice from the terms used in our mission statement, create conditions. Thus, we will focus on those conditions that have the most impact or a keen impact on the life and well-being of children. So for the Kellogg Foundation, there are 3 goal areas: educated kids, healthy kids, and secure families. So our work focuses on shifting the conditions in the systems that impact the educational, health, and well-being and income opportunities for vulnerable families and for vulnerable families. All of our work is done through a lens of racial equity and community engagement, so that within each of these systems we know that there are structural issues that have maintained the inequities. So we're keen on supporting work that looks at those inequities and has attempts to address and mitigate those inequities, and also is focused on a vision where you would have equitable outcomes. And in addition to the racial equity, a key lens is through the voice of community, that it is community and their wisdom that's driving these solutions. It's community that's providing the leadership. So overall, that's the comprehensive framework that our board has elected to guide the Kellogg Foundation over the course of the next generation of work. Now, in particular, we recognize the keen role of the food system as a major driver. It is a key social determinant of health, so it has impact on health. Access to good food, access to whole food is critical to health. Food is also a driver for economic development, for entrepreneurship, for jobs. We look at food through a continuum, a good food continuum, starting first with first foods, the most local food you could get, a mother's breast milk, which is very nourishing for children and key to optimal development. Second is early food, having healthy food available in early child care and early education settings. School food, food that's available in K through 12 systems, and community food, food that's available in your neighborhood. Now, this could go anywhere from retail as well as farmers markets, but it actually has a broader frame, and it looks at, well, how does that food get from the land, food that's grown, and how does it show up on the plate of the child in the daycare center, in school? How does it show up in a farmer's market? How does it show up in a retail store? How does it show up in, let's say, for example, a hospital where employees are and eating in a cafeteria? How do we ensure that that food is the healthiest as possible? So, and having a viable community food system is key to all the other pieces of the food continuum at play. And of course, all focused on outcomes of healthy children and families. So what is good food? You've heard me mention at times this term good food. So, and as some of you may know, the Kellogg Foundation has a very long legacy of work in food and agricultural systems, diversifying from an industrial system to one that supports a more localized system where benefit is for the community. And so around 2006, 2008, a number of leaders in the field came together and worked here at the foundation with staff and consultants and came up with this frame of good food. Good food is food that is healthy, it is food that is green, it is food that is fair, and it's food that's affordable. So healthy is the most nutritious. Green, grown through sustainable practices as much as possible. Fair, that all along the food chain, who's growing the food, who's packing the food, who's processing the food, who's involved in manufacturing, who's involved in selling the food, who's involved in serving the food in restaurants, that all along that value chain, the workers are given fair prices, starting off with the farmer, to the farm workers, to those folks that are working in retail or in restaurants, so that there's fair wages and fair health benefits and fair working conditions, and then affordable, so that the price point is viable. Now, when you add all those up, boy, you can already think of a lot of barriers that are at play. But there are some amazing folks around the country, and some of you might be on this phone call this very minute, that have done some extraordinary experimentation and rebuilding a more diversified food system, one that is more localized, where, in fact, these characteristics are coming into play. What we're seeing now is another term that's being used in the field, real food. And so real food meaning food that is processed the least amount as possible, food that is whole. And as many of us have probably experienced, if you've had an opportunity to pull a carrot from the ground that's maybe been grown through organic practices or sustainable agricultural practices, green, as ecology friendly as possible, and you just wipe that dirt off and you bite into that carrot, there are sparkles that flow all over. And just imagine, why not have that opportunity be available for our little kids in daycare programs, as well as children in third grade, as well as families sitting around the dinner table, and doing it in a way that's very affordable. So our founder very early on recognized the relationship between food, between health, between leisure, and within economic development. And we've been fortunate to use that kind of framework in guiding our investments in this in the area. So briefly, our theory of change, starting from, I'm going to go back for a minute, if you notice that last line, it seemed reasonable to expect that specific groups would respond to an invitation to obtain it. Mr. Kellogg early on believed in the wisdom of community. And so resources were available to community through a process of community self-determination, and of course supported by knowledge and expertise in the field, but marrying in that with the know-how of community, that new innovations could develop, that change could happen. And that long-term change would require organizations to change their practices, would require policy change, there would be changes in the marketplace for long-term systems change. And then opportunities that with these innovations, you would be leveraging other resources to sustain and maintain and create opportunities for communities all across the country and tribal nations. So our theory of action, we've started with supporting innovations on the ground, and that has happened in early food. It's happened in first food, early food, school food, and in community food. And then linking those innovators through networks, connecting those innovators so they can both accelerate the work but begin to build the field. And then promoting policy and systems change to amplify and sustain those efforts. So I'm going to give you an example of where this has actually happened. And that has to do with our work in, okay, I'm one behind. That's the policy and the systems change that happens. So I'm one behind. So I wanted to give you an example of what's been happening in the farm to school movement. Now, farm to school was around years ago, and it sort of had its reemergence in around the late 90s, 1998, and when we first began tracking. And farm to school can mean any number of things, but a comprehensive farm to school program would have at play a community garden, a school garden on site on the school grounds. If that's not possible, nearby, at maybe a pocket park in a community, but nearby at most possible to work. And some urban schools we've seen where there hasn't been grass, we've seen beds being built, and within the beds, growing the food. So A, having a school garden. B, having a curricula in place, integrated. It's not just in health, it's math, science, geography, history, social sciences, culture, where kids are using examples from food systems in all of that work, and they're out spending time in the garden as part of their school time. Then having healthy food served in their cafeteria, and as much of that food being cooked, if not on site, in a kitchen within the school district and then brought to the school, but using as many local resources as possible and purchasing locally. So it's, for example, in Michigan, pending season, you're going to have lots of apples at play or asparagus at play, or et cetera, et cetera. And then a number of schools now are able to purchase year-round as communities are particularly in winter climates where it's cold, are learning to develop ways of growing food in hoop houses and greenhouses in order to have food available year-round. But in order to create these programs, the folks that are developing the menus are working very closely with the folks that are organizing procurement of locally sourced foods through their community. It could be urban as well as working with rural farms in order to meet the demand of the school. And then engagement with parents and also connected to the community work. And of course, the food now being served must follow the school nutrition standards established by the USDA that are healthier than in the past. So in 2002, the foundation began to support a community and academic partnership in Santa Monica with their public school system and with Occidental College. And together they worked on putting a comprehensive farm-to-school program in place. Many schools had relationships with individual farmers who would come into the classroom, who would actually maybe, there'd be one particular fruit or vegetable, or it could be center of the plate, could even be a meat product, grass-fed beef, for example, that was available for the school to purchase. So, so there are a number of those kinds of relationships that were evolving, but this particular project took it from an individual relationship of a farmer working with one school and expanding it district-wide to a comprehensive farm-to-school program. And from there, in 2007, as we were able to track about 400 farm-to-school programs across the country, a planning grant was given to a group of innovators who approached the foundation and said, we've been tracking the growth of this work around the country. We're in touch with other groups, and this involved both growers, leadership at the school district, as well as a community group that would link farmers with the school, and suggested that they wanted to get together and plan to see how can they build on their work, share and disseminate these findings to schools across the country. And as a result of a very small planning grant, they established the National Farm to School Network. Then, from 2008 to 2010, we saw extraordinary growth, reaching about 10,000 school buildings across the country, and a focus on addressing, the power of numbers of all these schools and community groups that worked with the schools to better inform policymakers about what's going to make a difference, since so many kids since so many kids, particularly kids living in low-income communities, being in school is the one place where they're getting breakfast, lunch, and now we're hearing from many schools across the country that also with the after-school programs that they're serving the kids dinner. So I'm aware there is some network connectivity, and I'm assuming that I am still in contact with folks through the speaker. Am I correct on that?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Okay, excellent. But we've lost the PowerPoint connectivity, right?
Oh, maybe you have. I have not lost connection. Let's see.
Okay,
so you can.
I'll keep talking. We're getting close to the end of the PowerPoint presentation, so I'll keep talking, and
I'm happy to advance the slides.
Yeah. Let's move it to the next one.
Okay.
2014.
Perfect.
Okay. So I will, as you see, the major growth. Okay. So now, since you've got the whole thing in front of you, let me go back to 2008, 2010. Two things happened. 2008, there was a farm bill that was passed, and the farm bill is a major bill that only until 2008 did the health community recognize that the farm bill had impact on the health of our food system. Up until that point, most of the folks that were involved in transforming the food system and in informing policymakers around the Farm Bill, the United States Farm Bill. And the Farm Bill is huge. It has impact on agriculture, on economic development in rural communities. It's where food stamps are. It's where WIC is. that many of the commodity programs are there. Most of the advocates have been working on it have been primarily involved either in agriculture or in the hunger issue. And many times those groups did not work together, and but each focused on their particular area of concern in the Farm Bill. There was, with the rise in obesity around 2007, there was sort of like a wake-up call in the public health and health community that the Farm Bill had something to do with health. And the American Medical Association, the American Public Health Association started to get involved and started to take a serious look at this huge legislation. So one of the things that happened in the Farm Bill of 2008 is that there were preferences allowed for schools to use the funding from another act, the Child Nutrition Act, but it's interesting that the Farm Bill gave them the opportunity to use those monies for local preferencing, so purchasing locally sourced, locally grown foods with a minimum cap, that they were able to do that. That was a big, big move. And as many of you can imagine, not only is this an opportunity to get healthy food to the kids, fresher food, and some of us would say more nutritious food, and from a scientific perspective, the multiple studies had some say, yes, it's more nutritious, others not. There's on particular pieces of fruits and also on, there is particular science around that, but I don't want to focus on that per se. You just got to see a kid smile when they're biting into a fresh strawberry that's locally grown versus a strawberry that's been traveling for days and thousands of miles. They taste different, and we all know taste has a lot to do with kids' preferences about food they like and don't like. So, so that was a big deal. So you're getting kids healthier food, but you're also, with the extraordinary amount of food that a school is going to buy, you're actually also adding some kind of stability to those in the farming community. And that we also know that that's going to maintain cash in the local community. And we know from a social determinant of health that wealth in a community and retained wealth has impact on health outcomes. So you're sort of getting two or three things at the same time here. So first was the Farm Bill, and second was the Child Nutrition Act in 2010. And the Child Nutrition Act, what's really critical here is funding that goes to schools that they can purchase food for low-income children through the free and reduced lunch program and the school breakfast program, that those dollars can be used to purchase locally sourced foods. And that was allowed through, again, the Farm Bill from the prior policy success that happened. So now within the Child Nutrition Act, there were also added bonuses and opportunities and incentives for local purchasing, as well as the passage of really strong school food nutrition standards that has made a difference in the kind of food that's served to children in our schools. So those were both major policy moves. And by 2010, we saw over 10,000 school buildings having farm-to-school programs. And now in 2014, we have 38,000 schools across the country and tribal nations that have farm-to-school programs. There are 48 states that have identified at the state level farm-to-school coordinators. And there's legislation that's been active and activated in almost every state across the country that supports farm-to-school movement. Now, there's a long way to go. This is about a third of the schools across the country, but there's no question about it that momentum is building. And the Farm-to-School Network now is a national organization, In addition to the 48 state coordinators that are identified, there are 7 organizations across the country that are available to provide technical assistance to schools and community groups that want to develop farm-to-school programs. There's a tremendous amount of literature that's available, manuals, guides of what this work is. Now, an interesting phenomena for an organization like the Kellogg Foundation. Today, we would not be providing grants to individual schools and communities that want to develop farm-to-school programs, because today we see this work as best practice. And we see that those are unique opportunities for local and community foundations, state foundations, family foundations. We also think it needs to be integrated into the school infrastructure. And we're seeing that more and more, in particular as school food service directors are working with child nutrition funds and using those funds to actually have the healthiest school food as possible. So, however, what we will do is support the field building and the network and the ongoing work to inform policy. There's another opportunity to inform policymakers with child nutrition activity beginning to happen again in 2015. And so that kind of work to bring the best practices to bear, to use the research and findings from this work to inform policy makers so that we can have the most enabling systems as possible to support this work and to leverage as much as possible public sector resources. The Oakland Unified School System in Oakland, California at this point in time is purchasing over 40% of the food that's served to the kids in school through local resources. In particular, as an equity move, they are making a point to purchase food from small to mid-sized farmers, which is very, very exciting. They're also pioneering something quite unique, that in 28 of their school buildings, they're also offering farmers markets, so that particularly in elementary schools and K-8 schools, so that when parents and other family members are coming to pick up the kids, they can go shopping in the farmers market that's on site in the school. So what's happening now is this work in the farm to school movement is being leveraged to also look at opportunities for having available healthy food as locally sourced as much as possible in early care and early education settings. So we're looking anywhere from daycare programs to Head Start programs. And from a study conducted with the Michigan State University, we're finding there's a lot of variety here in what is happening. A very small, home-based provider that has a daycare who's licensed may actually take her kids to the farmer's market, and they buy some fruits and vegetables there. The Head Start program may have a garden, and they're growing food that they can use in their food preparation. Or they're buying a community-supported agriculture basket where once a month they would get a basket of fruits and once a week they get a basket of fruits and vegetables that comes to the Head Start Center, and because their numbers are smaller, they can use the food from the baskets and serve it to the kids. In Kansas City, there's a very successful partnership between the YMCA that has 24 Head Start centers, a local foods management company called Bistro Kids, and Good Natured Family Farms, which is an alliance of over 150 farms. And in those 24 Head Start centers, they also are serving food where 40% of it is locally sourced. And there is also a federal resource called the Children's and Adult Care Food Program, where resources are available to provide food for low-income, purchase food for low-income children. So we're beginning to see farm to Head Start, farm to early food now tracking all over the country, but it has different forms. So I just want to go, I'm going to skip a slide and then go back. One of the things that we've learned is that for the success of early food, a farm to school, a Head Start program, that Head Start, that group of Head Start centers in Kansas City, the 24 Head Start centers, the food management company, that for them to be successful, they also have price point to meet, that having an alliance of family farmers, having a community food infrastructure is critical to that success. And that is the same with school food too, that there's got to be some mechanism at play in that local or regional community that connects those folks that are growing the food with where the food is being used, be it at home or be it what's bought in retail, what's bought in farmers market, the food that's served in the school meal program, the food that's served in the Head Start Center. So having some structure in the community where you're aggregating from multiple farmers, where you're processing and packaging, and where you're storing, and then where you're distributing. And the Kellogg Foundation has invested in a number of projects across the country where innovations clearly are building or rebuilding these kind of food community infrastructure, and we're seeing particularly where it's coming from a community self-determination, that we're seeing distributed leadership models, sharing of resources, both nonprofit and for-profit, but folks are really looking at the equity question, who's in the leadership, who's benefiting, both in the job creation and who has access. So, one more. So to close off, at the Kellogg Foundation, we are fortunate that our donor very on understood that it is only through cooperative planning, intelligent study, and group action activities on the part of the entire community that lasting results can be achieved. So I'm aware this is a lot of information put out in a very short period of time, but hopefully it can give you some understanding of those funders that are interested in transforming a community food system both at the local level, statewide, regional, and national. What is it that these kind of funders would be interested in supporting? And how, in particular, one national funder looks at its investments locally in innovation and then connects those local innovators to influence, to both build the field and influence long-term transformation. So I'm open to any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Linda Jo. I think there's about 100 or so people around the country, and maybe even around the world, that are standing up and kind of doing a virtual applause. Really, yes, really, really fantastic information that's shared, and I'm sure you probably answered a number of people's questions throughout the presentation. And there are questions coming in, and I'd be happy to read those aloud for you. I want to remind folks to just enter questions for Linda Jo. Just chat them in the Q&A box on the left-hand corner of your screen, and then I will read them aloud. We have probably about 20 minutes or so for moderated question and answer. And before we get into audience members' individual questions, we are really a clearinghouse for information about, over 100,000 foundations around the world. And one of the questions we get a lot from our audiences are around kind of how to approach a particular foundation. So that's kind of one of my questions. I want to start with you, if that's all right, is what advice do you have for folks wanting to make their first approach to you, and how do you wish to be initially contacted?
So the first piece is, I think it's helpful to take a look at the websites that the particular foundations have at play. And in particular, for the Kellogg Foundation with the food and community work, we do have a website, a sub-website very specific to the food and community work. And there, prospective grantees can familiarize themselves with current work that's been funded both locally and nationally, and then see, is what you're proposing to do around systems change? That is probably the first question that we ask people. There's a lot of great work where folks have developed some really great curricula and are promoting, education around healthy eating and physical activity in schools, in community centers, and that's very, very important work. That's not work that the Kellogg Foundation would be supporting at this point in time. That's more direct service work, and one of our concerns is once the grant money goes away, very few times does that get integrated and institutionalized within the organization. So we know there's deeper questions at play there, how that would happen. And see that that's real, those are, we recognize that work's important and see that many of our partners that, foundations that are working locally who want to support work that has direct outcomes where they can report short-term gains, those kind of projects work better there. Also, I found that many corporate foundations are interested in supporting that kind of work. So, but for the Kellogg Foundation, and those foundations that are starting to take strategic approaches to the work, the first question is, what is the systems change that's going to occur? The second question we would ask is, based on the population that this work is being involved in, whoever is interested in doing the work, how representative are they of the population most impacted? So if you're talking about work, for example, in Detroit, Michigan, where 80% of the population is people of color, we would look to say, is this work being led by people of color? If not, and it's an ally, who are the partners that the organization is working in? So those are all important things that you really need to consider. So if you feel you're in a space of innovation, then there are two opportunities. One is to go onto the website and submit a proposal. And I will share with you that a number of us as program officers, we look very seriously at what comes over the transom. And I have pulled projects out that have truly are innovative, are breakthroughs, and we're seeing now as a result of that work starting to see traction in the field. So, while many grants have come through, many proposals do not get funded. If in fact you are in that innovation space, it does rise to the top. So, and the second option is to, people have contacted our office if they want to explore something, an idea. What I will share is that we have a two-pronged process in our submission. The first is a pre-proposal. So it's a short application, and it's a way to, explore to see if there's interest. And then if there is interest, we would ask people to submit a full proposal. A number of foundations actually do have opportunity where if you have a concept paper, you can submit that concept paper. And we will be moving to that in the future. And that tends to be, I think, the easiest way to start a conversation is to submit that concept paper. But right now, it's in the pre-proposal. So that's usually after the website, taking a review, looking at some of those questions, and then saying, aha, I'm still in that innovative space, then to submit. Now, I will say, and this is where it's important to look at the website and look at the parameters, both geographic and issues. For those of you that there's anybody that's working in Michigan, in Mississippi, in New Mexico, in New Orleans, and in certain states in Mexico and in Haiti, those are our priority areas, and where we do comprehensive place-based work. So, for example, in our work in Michigan, we look at education, food, health, and economic development, and racial equity and community civic engagement as a whole. So it's more or less horizontal. And the work in our priority areas, we learn from the more in-depth work where we're exploring new innovative work in our goal areas. So for those folks that are in those 4 priority areas, depending on needs of that area, we may support some work that's best practice in addition to innovation. But similar to our national work, we also look at networking and field building and informing policymakers in those states in order to shift the conditions for vulnerable children and families. So taking a good look at the website is number 1. And then second is taking a chance in submitting a pre-proposal or concept paper.
Fantastic, thank you. And you answered one of my next question around geographic limitations, so I really appreciate you spending a little time on that already. All of this information I know is really, really helpful to folks on the line right now, so again, I appreciate it. I'm going to start just going through some questions from attendees. In fact, Erica Mitchell from the Federation of Virginia Food Banks is asking, what metrics is the foundation looking for in healthy food distribution proposals, specifically from food banks?
Well, so for the Kellogg Foundation, our work has not focused on emergency food distribution. We recognize that emergency food distribution is necessary given the dynamics at play in our communities and a very important way to address hunger. One of the things that we're seeing in some communities across the country, that food banks are sitting side by side with other members who are involved in the food system redesign that are looking at a win-win. When you go back to that community food infrastructure PowerPoint, you see all across the value chain opportunities for both economic gain, job creation, and meeting the needs of community, particularly those that live in areas of limited resources. So we have seen food banks, getting involved as members of a local food policy council, working side by side with farmers that are looking at how to redesign the food system. I had initially was going to have a second example in the PowerPoint of a program that's just recently actually got support from the most recent Farm Bill. It's a healthy food incentive program, and there are models all over the country now where somebody who's a SNAP user would go into a farmer's market and purchase fresh fruits and vegetables with their SNAP card, and they would receive double the amount of fresh fruits and vegetables that are grown locally. And we have seen sales and EBT sales in farmers markets go up, across the country. And this has been a mechanism where here the SNAP user is choosing to use their SNAP benefit to purchase healthier food. And anecdotally, there have been some studies that have shown that of the limited resources that people do have, they're actually shifting their purchasing of healthier foods. So, and we've seen food banks be very critical players, that they are sharing information about this kind of an opportunity with their neighborhood partners that are distribution sites. So it's shifting a bit from a charitable model to a model where here the consumer has the power of procurement with their SNAP benefits. But it's looking at a larger food system issue. We're seeing as a result of this program that it's also added stability for the farmers. So opportunities for partnerships, and in some communities the food banks have taken leadership around the redesign of the food system in their communities and gone way upstream beyond the emergency food system.
Great. And I am trying to post people's questions on the left too, to kind of reiterate them and share them with everyone on the call. And I had a few questions come in, so I'm going to kind of try and package them together around, is there a specific age group? You talked a lot about, very early food systems to grade school, et cetera. So I think people are interested in finding out what, can you kind of talk a little bit about the population of children, or the age range and funding?
Sure. Great question. So for the Kellogg Foundation, children are from 0 to 24. However, there is a priority on 0 to 8. It doesn't mean we wouldn't be also addressing systems that impact children as they're getting older. So, for example, working in K through 12 with the Farm to School program. But there is a priority of 0 to 8.
Great. And then I'm going to, yep, that's Diana's question. I hope that was answered for you, Diana. And then, Danielle's question around, what does Kellogg grant making look like for advancing policy change surrounding healthy food access? So you talked a lot about supporting work on informing policy. What exactly does some of that grant making look like? Is it advocacy grants or?
Sure. So I'll give an example. In 2011, the Kellogg Foundation convened a number of leaders around the country, both folks that were active nationally in advocacy groups, folks that are well connected in Washington, D.C., and also community groups across the country, and particularly focus of people of color, folks that had not been that involved in some of the food policy conversations to date. And out of that conversation came a number of areas for policy concern that, and a report was developed, and that was distributed. There were about 50 people that participated, and they distributed that around the country. And out of that came a number of policy targets that emerged. And so both locally, state, or nationally, we will provide support for advocacy efforts that focus on informing policymakers about a range of opportunities. None of the Kellogg Foundation funds can be used for lobbying, so we're very clear about that. A number of the organizations that we do work with, they have the ability to access other resources to fund, to support lobbying efforts if they are involved in lobbying efforts. But the Kellogg funds are only used to inform policymakers, to educate the public, and policymakers about a range of opportunities. And we actually do a lot of training of our grantees around what the advocacy opportunities are, because there's a lot that people can do before they cross the line. And there's a wonderful organization in Washington, D.C. called the Alliance for Justice that has some of the best materials, both, for nonprofits, of which foundations are a nonprofit, but for nonprofit community groups and for funders around advocacy and being very clear to all the partners as to what is advocacy and what it is not. So, for example, some of the gains that were made in some recent food and agricultural policy, I talked about the Healthy Food Incentive Program. There's now $100 million that's set aside for grants to support healthy food incentives around the country. Fresh food financing. These are, this is a project where capital is available both to support retail and food deserts, as well as now to support processing and distribution. And by distribution, I'm not specific to only, I'm talking about food that's coming from the farmers to retail stores, hospitals, schools, farmers markets, and of which an emergency system is a part of that overall distribution system. So this project actually was started in Pennsylvania, and some extensive research was done. It proved very successful in the number of jobs that were created as a result, and the amount of access that was increased for people in low-income communities to groceries. And so fresh food financing, for example, has continued to have success and support, bipartisan support actually, and a number of grantees were involved in informing policy leaders about what's the impact of this kind of an intervention. That if you had resources for capital to build or expand retail in low-income communities, what impact it would have. So that's an example. In the most recent Farm Bill, there's been a lot of incentive for local and regional procurement, more than any other Farm Bill that it's had. That most likely happened because a number of groups were very successful in informing policymakers that investing in local regional food systems has impact on the local economy and on jobs. So in addition to the health impacts. So the opportunity to educate and inform, and there's a long way that one can go in that direction. Many folks were involved in preventing at least amount of harm around SNAP reductions, as folks are very aware of how important this is now. And again, opportunity for grantees to inform policymakers around the impact that access to SNAP has. So, there's, I think, an art and a science to do this in a way that you're doing it all within the legal means of what's allowable through the IRS.
Always a consideration. Thank you for expanding on that question, Linda Jo. I think that was on the minds of a few folks. A few questions are coming in, still working on kind of clarifying or hoping to understand the geographic places that you fund. And one question is really around, how do you come to the priority places that you choose? Is there a calendar for this kind of thing, and will that shift? And Someone else is also asking around funding in Africa. Is that something that you're still awarding?
Right. So the funding on Africa, my understanding, is on hold at this point in time, and the best I would suggest is to track on the website when that changes, if and when it changes. As far as the other areas are concerned, when our board made a shift in 2008 and adopted the framework, it felt that it was important to identify a couple places in the country where we could look at the work as a whole. And so partly historical, partly where the areas where there's great need, and also being mindful of our commitment to our home state, Michigan. So as a result of those lenses, work in New Mexico, work in Mississippi, work in Michigan, and then work in New Orleans. On the domestic side, we're shifted to a place-based approach and looking comprehensively. So whereas historically we had funded individually, like the health program funded and the education program funded, but never did the two talk. So now specific budgets have been set aside for those 4 areas domestically, and there's a number of dedicated staff to those 4 areas. We have an office in New Mexico, an office in Mississippi, there's an office in Mexico City, and we actually have an office in Michigan now. We also have an office in Detroit as well as Grand Rapids, in addition to our home office in Battle Creek. So, and those 4 areas, dedicated staff, dedicated budget, looking at both best practice and innovation, leverage change, focused on conditions, shifting conditions, looking also at networks and policy locally and statewide, and also in the tribal nations where they overlap with those 4 areas. I do want to say with New Orleans, Kellogg, with a number of foundations, joined, expanded our prior work there after Katrina to support New Orleans in its recovery, and chose to remain and has continued the work. So, so those 4 areas have dedicated staff that are 100% focused on those areas. And then our national staff who came to the foundation with expertise in education, in health, in food, in family economic security, continue to lead efforts nationally that primarily support innovation, that fund work in other places in the United States and tribal nations, and support the national policy work. And the Mexico work, I would say there has also been a shift there, that the Latin America work has shifted to work in 2 states within Mexico in addition to Haiti. And so that's just been work that's emerged over time. So at this point in time, our understanding is our board has made a commitment to support the place-based work over a generation.
Okay, over a generation.
To really see long-term change. But again, I just want to be clear, we continue to support work that's innovative in other places around the country.
Right. I'm reading that in your guidelines right now, so people that are chatting in questions around that, just please refer to the website. I think it is made fairly clear, and we will also be posting this webinar so you can share it with colleagues or listen to some of the advice that Linda Jo is sharing again. question around scale and scope. So, you know, a lot of our audience may be coming from smaller to mid-size nonprofit organizations. Are there any budget requirements, or what are some of your thoughts around smaller nonprofits or community-based organizations that want to apply to Kellogg Foundation? Is there scale or scope thoughts?
So probably the most critical question is the financial stability of the organization. What are the other funders at the table? What's the level of public sector support? Many funders in philanthropy are, cannot put themselves in a situation that their funding is going to tip an organization. So sometimes in working with a smaller grassroots organization, I will share in our place-based work, this really plays out, where you're also supporting the growth of that organization and following the lead of that organization as they evolve and develop and bring on other resources. Some groups choose, they want to stay small as a grassroots organization, and so, pending that will dictate what amount of money from any funder, including the Kellogg Foundation, would work.
Great, that is very helpful. And Julia has an interesting question, and this will be one of the last questions from the audience, and we'll move on in the program. She's wondering, is the Kellogg Foundation concerned about fast food marketing to kids? So this kind of marketing is everywhere, and parents are, it has a huge impact on all stages of eating. So any thoughts on that, or would this be considered some innovative programming from your perspective?
I apologize. There seems to be, one second, the door is open. There's a very strange noise here. 1 second. I did not hear the question. Yes, okay.
No problem.
It is 70 degrees in Michigan.
Wow.
And yes, the door was open. So can we repeat the question, please?
Oh, absolutely. This question's coming from Julia, and she's wondering if the Kellogg Foundation's concerned about fast food marketing to kids. Noting that this kind of marketing is prevalent everywhere, and that it does have a huge impact on all stages of eating, including on parents.
Right.
Thoughts on that, or maybe this?
So that's very important work, and our colleagues, Robert Johnson Foundation and California Endowment, have really taken an extraordinary leadership role in that area. So if you're interested in that work, my recommendation, if you're in California, I don't know, Julia, what state you're in. If you're in California, you might want to connect with the California Endowment. Is nationally, Robert Johnson Foundation has taken leadership in that work.
From Deborah, you spoke about Head Start programs. Do you fund that kind of program? That's her question.
So that's an interesting question. Do we fund that kind of program? I'll share with you in our Detroit work, and again, that's the place-based work. So we actually are funding work in a Head Start program as a pilot. They're working with a local food organization, and there's a chef in the Head Start program that's very interested in shifting their food, improving their school food meals. And so we've been supporting that particular Head Start project. Our hope is that as a result of that, working with a technical assistance provider, that we can look at a scale-up systemically in Detroit through some shared services around food procurement and institutionalizing gardens and curricula in the classrooms. So we have funded that work in several places around the country. At this point, we are very interested in seeing how that work can be accelerated by leveraging the National Farm to School Network. So most likely we would not be funding more individual programs of Head Start programs integrating, education, the gardens, but more would be focusing on how that gets disseminated across, since the models have been developed, and supporting technical assistance, and also that there are federal resources that can be leveraged for Head Start centers to purchase locally sourced foods. However, if you are in Mississippi, New Orleans, Michigan, or New Mexico, you need to connect with the program officers in that area. And if you want to explore, you could submit a pre-proposal, and those program officers would respond accordingly.
Brilliant. That is you all heard it here in terms of the next steps in terms of how to apply or how to connect. That was going to be one of my final thoughts or questions for you, Linda Jo. We can't take any more audience questions, so I appreciate everyone who chatted in, and my apologies for not getting to every single person's question, but now you know the channels in which to connect and communicate with staff at the Kellogg Foundation. And I've been told that my mic is really, really loud and the sound is loud for you all, so I apologize. I'm going to try and whisper, and I've put the mic as far away as I can without it falling off my head, but I understand it can be a little loud for folks on the other end, so my apologies. We are going to move into the next few minutes around giving a quick tour of the Foundation directory online. Just give me a second to share my screen, so there will be a brief jog in the screen. And so give me 1 second here, and that should, not going to share my email with you, that's not that exciting. But here is how you can connect with and search for and research data on other foundations doing work in the health and human services space, or more specifically around agriculture and food systems change. This is a tool that we update every week. It's called Foundation Directory Online, and this tool is available at many places around the world, and I think I can name about 40 locations in the state of California alone where you can go and use it for free. If you wanted to use it on your home or office computer, you would have to pay for it, but I also want to just do a quick search and show you how you can even find more information on the Kellogg Foundation. And so one quick search in searching maybe some additional funders that might be interested in some of the things around our discussion today is by clicking search grant makers. There's about 120,000 or so different foundations in this database in the professional level of the Foundation Directory Online, and a whole lot of ways to search to get to the same place. One way, of course, would just be matching fields of interest, right? Looking for a mission match or funding area match. And as we were discussing, we can include agriculture and food in our search here. Maybe we also want to include the population of children. That might also be something that we're including in our search. So really thinking of populations as well as program or issue areas. And the second kind of criteria you may want to include in your search is type of support. We, through our discussion today, went over advocacy type of support, which Kellogg gives, or program support. Someone also was talking and asking questions around seed money or startup dollars. So around the type of support field, you can really look for and indicate a specific type of support that you're interested in searching for. And I'll just include program development support, since it is one of the most popular types of funding out there. And then in terms of geographic focus, look, there's a lot of people on our call today from all over the country, so I'm going to just include national. So at this point, we're asking the database to search and bring back results on funders interested in funding agriculture, food or children. They give program support anywhere in the country. And I'm just going to click the big blue search button at the bottom, and then upper left-hand corner here, we get a snapshot of our search, and we can see over 100 results have come back to us alphabetically. I can also go ahead and just take out any funders that don't have an application process and just kind of almost cut those results in half. Now, as I scroll down, I know there's going to be one funder in particular that is very recognizable to many of us on the call, and I can just look up a little bit more information about the Kellogg Foundation. Of course, their website is going to be a great place to go to immediately as well. But as we scroll down, I do want to say, I did include the information we're looking at right now on the Kellogg Foundation. I included this profile as a handout through the webinar platform, so you can download this. What's nifty is the 990 PFs are available as a PDF downloadable form in the handout, in the PDF handout as well that I shared with you. And you can see a little bit more information around the program areas for the Kellogg Foundation. And of course, we know much more about this area right now. And scrolling on, but I wanted to share with you this tool that if you're interested in looking up some foundations that would be appropriate for you to apply to find additional funding partners for your program areas, the Foundation Directory Online might be a good friend in that way. And then there's a number of tools on the top too. So make sure you check out the Foundation Directory Online. And I'm going to bring us back to our original PowerPoint. If there are questions around how to use the database, I'm happy to entertain those. I'll share my contact details towards the end of the program here as well. All right, sorry about that. I thought maybe it would bring to the very end of the PowerPoint presentation. So we are offering to everyone who would call today a discount on the database, the Foundation Directory Online. So you would just go ahead and use the discount code Try Now, and that is also available as a handout in the upper left-hand corner. And we want your feedback, so please let us know how we can improve our webinar presentations. And it's just a five question or so survey, and especially from folks that we may not interact with as frequently, we want to know, what kind of topics you are interested in learning or hearing about, or other presenters or speakers or foundations that we can connect you to. Happy to entertain those comments and suggestions. And then lastly, as follow-up, please visit the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's website for details on how to apply and to further refine your questions. Join us on more webinars, and of course you're welcome to get in contact with me. My email address is on the screen should questions come up. But again, I really hope that everyone can join me in standing and applauding and thanking Linda Jo Doctor from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation for joining us and answering our questions and sharing such detailed information on her work. Thank you so much, Linda Jo. We really appreciate it. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again.